I was out the back trimming the rosemary hedge when my phone buzzed on the outdoor table. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of bright, still day you only get in the Hunter Valley, just before the heat of November settles in properly blue sky, dry air, the smell of cut grass drifting over from the neighbor's yard. I'd been working through a few garden jobs I'd let stack up since the end of winter, and honestly, I was glad for the excuse to be outside and moving. At 63, sitting still for too long starts to feel like a decision rather than a rest. I pulled off my gardening gloves and picked up the phone. I was expecting a message from my mate Des about whether we were still on for bowls on Thursday. Or maybe a reminder from the medical center about my annual checkup. Instead, it was a text from my daughter-in-law, Pauline. Short and pleasant on the surface, the way messages are when someone wants to soften the ground before saying something harder. Hi, Neville. Hope you're keeping well. When you have a moment, could you check your email? Sent through something about Christmas and wanted to give you plenty of notice. Thanks, Pauline. I stood there with the phone in my hand for a moment. Plenty of notice. That phrase did something to me I couldn't quite name. In my experience, people who genuinely want you somewhere don't need to give you plenty of notice. They ring you up and say, "Come over." And you come over. Plenty of notice is the language of scheduling around something or someone. I went inside, washed my hands at the laundry sink, and made myself a cup of tea before I opened the laptop. I wasn't in a hurry. I've learned over the years that the few minutes you take before reading difficult news are never wasted. The subject line read, "Christmas this year wanted to keep you in the loop." I opened it. Hi, Neville. Hope the garden's coming along well. Liam and I have been chatting with my mum and she's flying up from Hobart for the full Christmas week. First time in 3 years. So we want to make the day itself feel really relaxed and low-key, just us and her, together. We know it's a big ask, and we're truly grateful for everything you do for us, especially with Archie's sessions. It's made such a difference. We were thinking you could come by on the 27th or 28th. The boys would love to see you. Warmly, Pauline. I read it once. Then I set the mug down carefully on the coaster and read it again. Just us and her together. That was the phrase. Not just immediate family. Not keeping things small. Just us and her. Together. As though I was something separate. As though 18 months of covering the cost of my grandson, Archie's occupational therapy somewhere north of $31,000 by that point, had purchased me a visit on the 27th and not a seat at the table on the day. I want to be clear about what Archie's sessions had meant, because it matters to understanding everything that came after. Archie was 7 when his school first flagged that something was making learning harder for him than it should have been. He was bright. Anyone who spent 10 minutes with him could see that. But he struggled with fine motor tasks, had trouble organizing his thoughts on paper, and found busy environments genuinely overwhelming in a way that left him exhausted and sometimes in tears before dinner. The pediatrician recommended occupational therapy and a specialist assessment. My son, Liam, and his wife, Pauline, were both working full-time. Liam was a site supervisor for a civil construction company in the Upper Hunter, and the hours were long. Pauline was a dental nurse, 4 days a week. They had Archie and his younger brother Cooper, who was 5 at the time, and a mortgage on a place just outside Cessnock that stretched them about as far as a young family can be stretched. The OT assessments and the regular sessions ran to something like $380 a fortnight. Not impossible, but tight. The kind of tight where you start asking yourself which thing you stop doing. Liam mentioned it to me the way he mentions most difficult things sideways, without quite looking at me, the way he's done since he was a teenager and wasn't sure how I'd react. He said they were thinking of cutting Archie back to once a month because the fortnightly appointments were becoming hard to carry. I didn't wait for him to finish the sentence before I'd already decided. The next morning I rang the therapy center, spoke to the practice manager, and arranged for invoices to come directly to me. Fortnightly sessions. Every cycle. for as long as Archie needed them. I'd been a mechanical engineer for 34 years before I retired. I wasn't wealthy by any definition that would impress anyone. But I'd been careful, and I had some room to move. More importantly, I had a grandson who needed something I could give him. Over the next 18 months, I watched Archie change, slowly at first, then noticeably. His handwriting became something he was no longer embarrassed by. He started finishing tasks at school without the afternoon meltdowns that had been a weekly occurrence. His teacher sent home a note in term 3 of year 2, saying he'd volunteered to read aloud to the class and done it without hesitation. Liam rang me that evening, and his voice had something in it I hadn't heard from him in years, pure, uncomplicated relief. I was there for it. That's the part I keep coming back to when I try to make sense of everything that followed. I was at the therapy center car park every second Thursday when Pauline couldn't do the pickup, waiting with a cold water bottle and a Freddo frog, because Archie always came out hungry and thirsty and needing 5 minutes of quiet before he was ready to talk. I was there on the good sessions and the hard ones. I knew the name of his therapist, knew which activities he found easiest, and which ones still made him want to give up. I wasn't a check in the mail. I was the grandfather who showed up. I closed the laptop after reading Pauline's email and stood at the kitchen window for a long time. From there, I can see the back corner of the yard where I built the boys a wooden cubby house 2 winters ago. It took me 3 weekends, and I let Archie help with the easier parts, handing me screws, holding pieces in place, learning the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead. Cooper had mostly supervised from a safe distance and offered running commentary that was largely unhelpful but always entertaining. That cubby house was still standing. The painted handprints on the doorframe were still there, slightly faded. My wife June had been gone for 4 years. Ovarian cancer, discovered late and moving fast. The way those things go sometimes, no matter how careful you've been about checkups and living well. She was 60 when she died, and I was 59. And the particular cruelty of losing someone that young is that you spend a long time afterwards standing in rooms she used to occupy, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do next. The garden had been hers first. I'd taken it over as something to do with my hands during those first months, and then it had become mine. The grandkids had helped with that too, in the way that children do without knowing they're doing it, by needing you around, by making the present tense feel like something worth staying in. Pauline's mother, Glenda, was a different matter from me, in almost every way that matters in a family. She lived in Hobart. She flew up twice a year, stayed for a week at a time, and those weeks tended to reorganize everything around her preferences without anyone quite noticing how it had happened. She was perfectly pleasant to my face, the kind of pleasant that has a small thermostat on it, warm enough but calibrated, never running hot. She had opinions about how Archie and Cooper should be raised that she delivered as observations, and Pauline, who loved her mother and had learned over a lifetime to smooth things over rather than push back, absorbed those opinions with a smile and adjusted accordingly. I understood the dynamic. I'd watched it build over the 7 years since Liam and Pauline had married. Glenda lived far away, and that distance made her visits feel like events, with the elevated importance that comes with infrequency. I lived 40 minutes up the valley. I was reliable and present, which, in family economies, sometimes translates as ordinary. I didn't ring Liam that afternoon. I've made enough rushed phone calls in my life to know that the first version of what I want to say is almost never the right one. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do in the years since June passed. I went back outside, picked up the hedge trimmer, and kept working until my hands had done something useful and my head had caught up. That evening, I opened my emails and started going back through the records I'd kept. Not because I was planning anything specific, but because I've always found it settling to have the facts in front of me before I make any decision. Bank transfer receipts to the therapy center, 18 months of them. Emails from Pauline thanking me after Archie's progress reviews. A message from Liam from 4 months back. Dad, I know I don't say it enough, but I genuinely don't know how we'd manage without you. Screenshots from my phone of the Thursday afternoon pickups, Archie and Cooper in the back seat making faces at the camera. Archie holding up the certificate he'd got for completing a full term of group OT sessions. I put it all in a folder on the desktop. I labeled it simply Record and left it there. 2 days later, out of something I can only describe as a quiet instinct, I had a look at Pauline's Facebook page. I don't use social media much myself. I have an account, but I mostly look rather than post. She'd put something up 3 days earlier. A screenshot of a booking confirmation from a resort in Port Douglas. 7 nights over Christmas and New Year. The kind of place with an infinity pool and a reef tour package. The caption said, "So grateful this Christmas. The best gift. Can't wait to show the boys." I sat with that for a while. The January invoice for Archie's therapy, block 8 sessions. Same as every cycle would come to me in the first week of the new year. The amount would be just under $3,000. So grateful this Christmas. I've spent a good part of my adult life solving problems that required me to hold 2 contradictory pieces of information in my head at the same time and find the point where they connected. That's what engineering is. At its core, you look at what should work and what isn't working, and you find the gap. The gap here was not subtle. I'm not a man who acts from anger. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. June used to say I was the most patient person she knew, and she meant it as a compliment, but also, occasionally, as a mild criticism. She thought I let things drift longer than I should sometimes, that I confused peacekeeping with problem solving. She was probably right. In the years since I lost her, I've tried to be a little more honest about the difference. I sat down and wrote a reply to Pauline's email. I wrote 4 drafts and deleted 3 of them. The final version was short. "Hi, Pauline. Thanks for the message about Christmas. I completely understand that having Glenda up for the week is special, especially after the last few years. I do want to check in with you both about something before the end of the month. I noticed the Port Douglas booking, and it looks wonderful. I just want to make sure we're on the same page about the January therapy invoice coming through as usual. Could the 3 of us find time for a quick call this week? Thanks, Neville." I read it back twice. It said what needed to be said without saying more than that. It asked a question instead of making an accusation. I pressed send before I could second-guess myself further. Liam rang that evening. His voice had that particular tightness I recognized from when he was a teenager, and had done something he wasn't sure how to explain. "Dad, Pauline showed me your email. She's a bit taken aback." I told him I understood that. I asked him if he could help me understand how the numbers added up, because from where I was sitting they didn't quite. There was a pause. "The Port Douglas trip is Mum's gift to us," he said. "Pauline's mum. It's not coming from our budget. It doesn't affect Archie's sessions." I said I understood that too, but I asked him to think about how it looked. His mother-in-law was flying the family to a resort for Christmas week, and the same week I'd received an email telling me I wasn't invited to Christmas Day, that I should come by on the 27th, and I was the one covering Archie's therapy every cycle. He didn't say anything for a moment. "That's not how we meant it," he said finally. I asked him how they had meant it. He didn't have an immediate answer, and I didn't fill the silence for him. I've learned that silence, handled calmly, is one of the most useful tools available to a parent. Eventually, he said that Glenda didn't get to see the boys very often, that she'd asked for Christmas Day to feel contained, that they'd thought the 27th was a reasonable option. I told him that I lived 40 minutes away, that I saw the boys most weeks, that I was the one waiting in the car park every second Thursday when they both had other things on, and that I was the one being offered the 27th. "Dad, Liam, I love you, and I love Pauline, and I love those boys in a way I don't have adequate words for. But I need to say something clearly. I can't continue to be the person who shows up for this family financially and practically and emotionally while being treated as an optional extra when someone more important comes to visit. That's not a family relationship. That's a transaction with courtesy attached. He exhaled. What do you want me to do? I want you to hear what I've just said. Really hear it. And then I'd like the three of us to sit down together in person. You, me, and Pauline. And talk this through properly. Not by email. Not on the phone. If Glenda is part of how decisions get made in your house, then she should be there too. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might be composing himself, rather than composing an answer. Then he said he'd talk to Pauline. I thanked him and let him go. The following 10 days had the quality of waiting without expectation, which is different from waiting with hope. I went about my usual things. I drove up to see a mate who was recovering from a knee replacement. I spent a Saturday repainting the cubbyhouse trim because the boys had asked me to make it green, which I thought was a considerable improvement over the original gray. Cooper had supervised, same as always, and had informed me that the shade of green I'd chosen was more like a sick frog than a normal frog, which I took on board for future reference. On the 8th of November, I received an email from Pauline. Bright, friendly, nothing in its tone that acknowledged our last exchange. Hi Neville, just a reminder that Archie's next therapy block starts January 9th. Melissa mentioned she'll send the invoice to you as per usual in the first week of January. He had such a good session last week, she said he completed the whole fine motor sequence without stopping. We're so proud of him. Hope you're enjoying the spring. P. I read it once and felt something shift in my chest. Not anger. Something quieter and more definite than anger. She wasn't going to bring it up. The plan was to send a warm update about Archie, let the warmth do the work of normalizing things, and expect the invoice to be paid on schedule while I spent Christmas Day on my own in the Hunter Valley. I replied the same morning. Hi Pauline. That's wonderful news about Archie. The fine motor sequence is something he's worked hard at and I'm so proud of him. I do want to revisit my earlier message, as I haven't heard back about meeting in person, and I think it's important we do this before the end of the month. I'd like to have an honest conversation about what our family arrangements look like going forward, including the therapy support. Let me know when suits. Neville. Liam rang before lunch. Dad. What does going forward mean? Are you saying you might stop Archie's sessions? I told him I was saying I wanted a conversation before making any decisions. That was all I was saying. He needs those sessions, Dad. You know what the last 2 years have meant for him. I told Liam that I knew exactly what the last 2 years had meant for him, because I'd been part of every step of it. A pause. Then quietly, when do you want to meet? I told him the following Saturday. At my place. At 2 o'clock. Him and Pauline. And if Glenda was still in town, she should come too. He hesitated. Mum flies back to Hobart on the 18th. Then the 16th, I said. Bring her. They arrived at 2:05. Liam looked like he hadn't slept quite enough. Pauline looked like she had prepared herself for something. Glenda came in behind them, a neat, compact woman in her late 60s, with the particular composure of someone accustomed to being considered the adult in most rooms she enters. She took in my kitchen with a quick, assessing look and gave me a smile that was polite and slightly guarded. I'd set the table with 4 chairs, 4 glasses of water, and a printed summary sheet I'd put together, not a legal document, nothing theatrical about it, just a 1-page record of what I'd contributed over the past 18 months and what the ongoing commitment looked like. I'd also put out a plate of Tim Tams because whatever else was happening, it was still afternoon tea. Thank you for coming, I said. Please sit down. Once everyone was settled, I took a breath and started simply. I want to say first that I love my son and I love Pauline, and those 2 boys are the best thing in my life since I lost June. I'm not here to make anyone feel bad or to have an argument. I'm here because there are things that need to be said directly, and I've always found that problems don't get smaller when you go around them. I slid the summary sheet across to Liam and Pauline. Over the past 18 months, I've contributed just over $31,000 toward Archie's occupational therapy. That's not counting birthday and Christmas presents, school shoes, the cubby house, the Thursday afternoon pickups, the fuel, or the time. I've done all of it because I love Archie, and because I believe the therapy is giving him something he'll carry for the rest of his life. I didn't do it to create an obligation. I looked at each of them, but I received an email telling me I'm not invited to Christmas Day. And a few days after that, I saw a booking confirmation for a week in Port Douglas. And I'm sitting here trying to find a version of those two facts that fits together fairly. Glenda opened her mouth. Neville, I kept my voice even. Glenda, I'd appreciate a moment to finish. She looked briefly surprised. She closed her mouth. I'm not raising the Port Douglas trip to be difficult, I said. If you want to give your daughter's family a holiday, that's a generous thing, and it's your business entirely. What I'm raising is the pattern underneath it. When the family needs something financially or practically, I'm considered family. When there's a decision about who sits at the Christmas table, I'm a courtesy booking on the 27th. I've let variations of that go for a long time, and I'm not willing to let it go any further. Pauline's eyes had filled. She was looking down at the summary sheet. Liam was staring at the table with his jaw set in the way it gets when he's holding something in. I looked at Glenda directly. You're the boys' grandmother from their mother's side. That is real. And it matters. And I have never once thought otherwise. But you live in Hobart. You visit twice a year. And in those visits, you have a way of quietly reorganizing things around what you'd prefer. And Pauline accommodates it because she loves you, and that's what she's learned to do. I understand that, but it's had some effects on how this family works that I don't think you've sat down and looked at directly. Her chin came up slightly. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm describing what I've observed over 7 years. You're very good at making your preferences felt without making them a demand. It's a particular skill, but the result of it, in this case, is that your daughter sent me an email that made me feel like a useful stranger. And I don't think either of you intended that, but it's what happened. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the ceiling fan moving slowly overhead. Liam raised his head. He looked at Pauline, then at Glenda, then at me. His expression had the quality I remembered from when he was about 14 and had to choose, in front of witnesses, whether to tell the truth about something. He'd always chosen the truth eventually, even when it cost him. He said, "Dad's right." His voice came out rougher than he'd probably intended. We've been taking him for granted. I don't think we did it deliberately, but that's what's been happening. Pauline made a small sound. Liam glanced at her gently. He is in that car park every second Thursday. He is at every school event. He built the boys a cubby house in the middle of winter because Archie asked him to, and we sent him an email about Christmas like he was someone we needed to manage the schedule around. He stopped. I'm ashamed of that. Pauline put her hand flat on the table. She looked at me, and when she spoke, her voice was careful in the way of someone making sure the words come out exactly right. Neville, I owe you a real apology, not a softened one. I handled Christmas badly. Mum mentioned she wanted the day quiet, and I agreed without stopping to think about what it would mean from your side. And then when you raised it, I sent you a cheerful email about Archie's sessions, as though the conversation hadn't happened. She shook her head. I knew it was wrong when I was writing it. I'm sorry. I looked at Glenda. She was sitting with her hands folded on the table, and there was something working behind her expression that I hadn't expected to see, not defensiveness, but something that looked, to a patient man, like recognition. After a moment she said, I'm not good at sharing. I know that about myself. My sister would tell you the same thing, and she'd be right. She paused. When I come up to visit, I want to feel important to those boys, and I don't always account for the fact that the space I take up belongs to someone else as well. It wasn't a full apology, and she probably knew that. But it was honest. And honest is more useful to me than polished. I let a breath out slowly. Here's what I'd like to put on the table, I said. I'll continue covering Archie's therapy sessions through to the middle of next year, the end of term 2. After that, I'd like you both to take over that responsibility. Not because I want to withdraw support, but because the right outcome is for you to build the financial footing to sustain his care independently. That gives you 7 months to plan for it. Liam nodded immediately. That's more than fair, Dad. Second, I expect to be included in the significant family moments. Christmas, Easter, the boys' birthdays, school events. When Glenda visits good, I'm glad she does, but I'm there as well. If that takes some coordination, we coordinate. Of course, Pauline said quietly. Of course. Third, my Thursday afternoon pickups stay. They're not a favor I do for you. They're part of how I am a grandfather to Archie and Cooper, and that doesn't get scheduled around other people's preferences. Glenda leaned forward slightly and asked, with a directness I hadn't heard from her before. And what about me? Genuinely, where does that leave me? I looked at her steadily. It leaves you in exactly the position you've always occupied, which is a good one. You're their grandmother. You come up. You spend time with them. You're part of their lives. The only thing that changes is that you're not the one who decides how the rest of the family fits around your visit. There's room for both of us in those boys' lives. There always has been. That was never the problem. She held my gaze for a moment, then gave a single, slow nod. I accepted that as what it was. We talked for another hour after that. The conversation moved into quieter territory, the way it does once the hard part has been said. Glenda asked about June. She'd met her only a couple of times before she passed, and I told her a little about who June had been, the garden, the way she'd taught Liam to cook, the fact that Archie's serious way of concentrating on things reminded me of her. Pauline cried a little at that, quietly, and didn't apologize for it. At some point, I made more tea and found another packet of Tim Tams in the cupboard. Cooper would have called that a win. Glenda left first. At the door, she paused in a way that reminded me, oddly, of a person choosing whether to say something or not. Then she said, "You're a steady man, Neville. I mean that as a compliment. Not everyone is." I thanked her for coming. I meant it. After Pauline went to get the car, Liam stood in my kitchen doorway and didn't move for a moment. "Dad," he said, "I keep thinking about Mum. She would have sorted this before it ever got to an email." "She would have," I agreed. "But you sorted it yourself. That counts for more than you might think." He looked at the floor for a moment. "I scared myself a bit when you implied the sessions might stop. I know you wouldn't have done it. But the fact that I couldn't be certain, I know." I said, "That was intentional. Not cruel, but intentional. I needed you to understand what was at stake. Not as a threat, as information." He nodded slowly. He hugged me properly on the way out. The kind of hug that has some weight to it. Both arms, held for a beat longer than the quick ones. I stood on the front step and watched them reverse out of the driveway and head down the road, and when the tail lights had disappeared around the corner, I went back inside and stood in the kitchen for a while in the quiet. Christmas that year was full, noisy, and occasionally awkward in exactly the way you'd expect from a family that has recently had to learn some things about itself. Glenda was more careful than she'd been before, not diminished exactly, but attentive, in a way that suggested she'd done some thinking. She made a point of asking me questions rather than making statements, which from her was significant enough that I noticed. Archie gave me a drawing he'd done at school. 2 figures on a beach, a tall one and a small one with a crab between them, and what I assumed was the sun, though it bore more resemblance to a large, yellow, spiky ball. He'd written at the bottom, in handwriting that was finally, unmistakably his own, "This is us at Nelson Bay, Grandpa. The us was underlined. Twice. I put it on the fridge when I got home, and it's still there. Pauline gave a short toast before we ate. She thanked everyone for being there, and then she looked at me and said simply, "We're glad you're here, Neville." Properly glad. Glenda raised her glass. Liam looked at his plate for a moment, then looked up and smiled. Things aren't perfect, of course. Nothing is. Glenda still has her moments of quiet repositioning, and I still have my moments of noticing them. But she no longer steers Christmas around her own preferences, as though no one else has any, and I no longer let things drift until they've drifted too far. We've both, I think, learned to take up exactly the space we're entitled to. No more, no less. Liam and Pauline took over Archie's therapy billing at the start of Term 3. It required some reshuffling on their end. They canceled a couple of subscriptions, cut back on some other things, made it work. Liam told me about it matter-of-factly, without embarrassment, and I heard the quiet pride underneath the matter-of-factness. That was the part that mattered most to me. Not that I'd saved money, but that they'd built the muscle of doing it themselves. I still do the Thursday pickups. Archie is 9 now, and reading well above his year level. Last month he told me he wants to be a marine biologist, and spent 25 minutes explaining the difference between a reef shark and a bull shark, with an authority that genuinely impressed me. Cooper, who had been listening from the back seat, announced that he wanted to be a shark. This sparked a philosophical discussion that lasted most of the drive home and was never fully resolved. The cubby house is still standing. I touched up the trim again in August. Cooper had revised his opinion and now wanted blue, which I considered an improvement on the sick frog green. We did it on a Saturday morning together, just the two of us. Him handing me the brush when I needed it and asking the kind of questions that only children ask. Why does paint dry if it's already wet? Do houses ever get lonely? What was it like before the internet? I don't always have the right answers, but I'm reliably there when the questions come. I've thought a lot in the past year about what nearly happened, how close I came to letting it continue. The email on the 27th, the cheerful invoice reminder. The quiet expectation that I would keep giving without anyone ever having to account for what they were taking. I'd let variations of it happen for years, telling myself I was being easy to be around, telling myself it was enough to be useful. June always said that the kindest thing a person could do for the people they loved was to be honest with them, even when the honesty was uncomfortable. She used to say it so readily that I think I took it as a general principle, and forgot it was also specific instruction. She wasn't just talking about being honest with other people. She was talking about being honest about what you needed, about who you were, about what you were and weren't willing to accept. I didn't do that for a long time. I kept smoothing things over and calling it generosity when a good deal of it was just avoidance. It was easier to keep paying and keep showing up and keep being useful than it was to say, I need to matter here. Not as a resource, as a person, as the grandfather of these children, as the man who built their cubby house and waits in the car park, and grieves their grandmother every time one of them laughs in a way that sounds like her. That is not too much to ask. It was never too much to ask. And the fact that it took me 63 years to say it out loud is something I've made my peace with, mostly. If you found yourself in something like this, and I suspect some of you have, because these things are not as uncommon as we pretend, then here is what I'd offer you. For whatever it's worth, from a retired engineer who grows rosemary and drives a 9-year-old to therapy every second Thursday. Generosity that has no limits attached to it does not deepen relationships over time. It teaches people the shape of a relationship where one person gives and the other receives, and eventually that becomes the only shape either of them can imagine. It doesn't happen out of cruelty. It happens out of habit. And habits are invisible until someone names them. The people who genuinely love you do not need you to be endlessly accommodating. They need you to be honest. They need to see that you know what you're worth. Not in dollars, not in hours in car parks, not in invoices paid on time, but as a human being whose presence in a room means something. Because here is the thing about families. They will take the measure of you that you offer them. If you offer yourself as useful but deferrable, that is how you will be used. If you offer yourself as someone who shows up and matters and will occasionally require mattering in return, most of the people who love you will rise to meet that. They just need to be asked. Ask. Say the thing you've been not saying. Have the kitchen table conversation you've been putting off. The hard conversations I've had in my life. The ones that felt for a moment like they might break something irreparable. Not one of them did the damage I was afraid of. Every one of them cleared air that needed clearing. Every one of them moved something in the right direction. It is not selfish to take up the space you are owed in your own family. It is, in fact, the most loving thing you can do for them and for yourself. Because a relationship built on honesty, even late arriving honesty, is the kind that can actually last. Know that. Sit with it. And if the right moment comes, take it.